If you're watching this right now, pay close attention, because sometimes the most dangerous lies don't sound cruel. They sound reasonable. They sound like, she's just confused. She's old. She doesn't remember things correctly. And that's exactly how everyone explained away what was happening to Eleanor Whitman. Before we begin, remember, this is a fictional story created for entertainment, inspired by themes of loyalty, courage, and the silent strength of animals. If stories like this move you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and tell us in the comments where are you watching from. Now, back to the story. Eleanor Whitman had lived in the same house for over 40 years, a narrow, two-story home on a quiet street where neighbors waved politely but rarely stopped to talk. She raised her children there. She buried her husband from there. Every wall carried memories, some warm, some painful, but all of them hers. Until the day the house stopped feeling like home. At 78, Eleanor moved more slowly, yes. She forgot small things sometimes, yes. But she was not confused. She remembered very clearly when her son Mark brought his new wife, Lydia, into the house. At first, Lydia smiled too much, spoke too sweetly, touched Eleanor's arm just a second longer than necessary, as if reminding her who now controlled the space. "It's better if we take care of you," Lydia said one afternoon, her voice light, cheerful. "You don't need to worry about things anymore." That was the moment Eleanor felt it. Not fear, not confusion, but the slow, cold realization of being erased. The only one who didn't treat Eleanor like she was invisible was Ranger. Ranger was a retired German shepherd, once a canine unit dog, broad chest, graying muzzle, amber eyes that missed nothing. He had followed Mark home from the police department months earlier, on the day Ranger was officially retired. The paperwork said, "No longer fit for duty." But Ranger hadn't seemed ready to stop protecting anyone, especially Eleanor. From the first night, Ranger chose her. He slept outside her bedroom door, not Mark's. He followed her slow steps through the hallway. He sat beside her chair during meals, his body positioned slightly forward, subtle, deliberate, observing, waiting. Lydia hated that. "Why is that dog always watching me?" Lydia snapped one evening, setting plates on the table harder than necessary. Ranger didn't move, didn't growl, didn't bark. He simply raised his head and looked at her, long enough to make Lydia uncomfortable. "He's harmless," Mark said, distracted, scrolling on his phone. "He's just old." Old. The word hung in the air. Eleanor noticed Ranger's ears twitch at that. Old didn't mean weak. Old didn't mean blind. And Ranger, more than anyone in that house, understood that. The first incident happened quietly. Too quietly. Eleanor had woken late that morning, her legs stiff, her mouth dry. When she shuffled into the kitchen, she found her breakfast already eaten. "Oh," Lydia said, barely looking up. "I thought you weren't hungry." Eleanor frowned. "I didn't say that." Lydia smiled. "You must have forgotten." Ranger stepped between them, not aggressively, just enough. That night, Eleanor cried softly in her room, not from hunger, from the feeling of being slowly pushed out of her own life. Ranger pressed his head against her knee and stayed there until her breathing slowed. From that moment on, he never left her side. Things escalated after that. Medication went missing. Her phone accidentally misplaced. Doors locked for safety. And every time Eleanor tried to explain, Lydia's voice would rise just enough for neighbors or Mark to hear. "She's confused again. She imagines things. It's dementia." Ranger reacted every single time. He paced, blocked doorways, stood between Lydia and Eleanor like a living wall. Once, when Lydia grabbed Eleanor's wrist too tightly, Ranger growled. Low, controlled, final. Mark yelled at the dog that night. "Enough! He's dangerous!" But Ranger didn't back down. He sat in front of Eleanor's chair and refused to move. That was the day Lydia made her decision. "We need to get rid of the dog," she said coldly. "He's unpredictable. He's upsetting her." Eleanor's heart dropped. Ranger lifted his head sharply. "No," Eleanor said, her voice trembling but clear. "He stays." Lydia laughed. "You see," she said to Mark, "she's confused again." Ranger's gaze locked onto Lydia's face. For the first time since he had arrived in that house, Ranger showed his teeth, not in rage, in warning. And in that moment, while Eleanor's hands shook and Lydia's smile froze, something shifted, because Ranger knew something no one else was willing to admit. Eleanor wasn't confused. She was being silenced, and he was the only one who refused to let that happen. Outside, the street remained quiet. Neighbors walked past, unaware. Inside the house, a silent battle had begun, and Ranger, the retired police dog everyone underestimated, had already chosen his side. If Eleanor Whitman had learned one thing in her 78 years, it was this: cruelty doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. After the argument about Ranger, the house changed. Not in obvious ways. No doors slammed, no voices were raised. Instead, everything became quieter. Too quiet. Lydia stopped arguing. She stopped smiling. She stopped pretending. And that scared Eleanor far more than anger ever could. The next morning, Eleanor woke to silence. No sound of breakfast being prepared. No footsteps in the hallway. No familiar clink of dishes. Ranger was already awake. He sat upright at the foot of Eleanor's bed, ears alert, eyes fixed on the door. His body was tense, not aggressive, but ready. "What is it, boy?" Eleanor whispered. Ranger didn't look at her. He was listening. Eleanor swung her legs off the bed slowly, joints protesting, and reached for her cane. As soon as she stood, Ranger moved in front of her, blocking the door. That had never happened before. "Ranger?" she said gently. The dog glanced back at her, then returned his focus to the hallway. Something was wrong. When Eleanor finally stepped into the kitchen, Lydia was already there, sitting calmly at the table, sipping coffee. She looked relaxed, too relaxed. "Good morning," Lydia said without looking up. Eleanor hesitated. "Good morning." Ranger stayed pressed against Eleanor's leg. "I made a few changes," Lydia continued casually. "For everyone's safety." Eleanor felt a chill crawl up her spine. "What kind of changes?" Lydia smiled and reached into her purse. She placed a small orange bottle on the table. "Your medication schedule," she said lightly. "You were taking it incorrectly. I've adjusted it." Eleanor frowned. "I've been taking the same medication the same way for years." Lydia's smile didn't falter. "That's what you think," Ranger growled. Low, quiet, unmistakable. Lydia's eyes snapped to the dog. "Control him," she snapped. Mark entered the room then, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "What's going on?" Lydia sighed dramatically. "Your mother is confused again. She doesn't remember agreeing to let me manage her medication." Eleanor's hands trembled. "That's not true." Mark hesitated, torn. "Mum, Lydia's just trying to help." Ranger stepped forward, between Eleanor and Lydia again. Mark raised his voice. "Ranger, back!" The dog didn't move. That was when Mark noticed something. Ranger wasn't growling at Eleanor. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't anxious. He was focused, protective, as if he understood something none of them did. Over the next few days, Eleanor's world grew smaller. Lydia insisted she rest. She misplaced Eleanor's phone. She told neighbors Eleanor wasn't feeling well. And slowly Eleanor stopped being seen. But Ranger noticed everything. He noticed when Eleanor's meals were smaller. He noticed when Lydia's tone sharpened behind closed doors. He noticed when Eleanor's hands shook more than usual. And most of all, he noticed the locks. One afternoon, Eleanor tried to step outside. The back door wouldn't open. She tried the front door. Locked. "Lydia?" Eleanor called. No answer. Ranger barked. Once, sharp, commanding. Lydia appeared in the hallway. "Oh," she said lightly. "I locked them. You wandered off last week, remember?" "I did not," Eleanor said, panic creeping into her chest. Lydia tilted her head. "Are you sure?" Ranger snarled. Not loud, but dangerous. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, memories swirling. Her husband, her children, when they were small, the woman she used to be. And now, this. She turned her head slightly. Ranger lay across the doorway, his body stretched wide, guarding. She whispered, barely audible, "They think I'm confused, don't they?" Ranger lifted his head and looked at her, straight into her eyes, and for the first time in days, Eleanor felt seen. The breaking point came 2 mornings later. Eleanor woke dizzy, her vision blurred, her heart raced. She tried to stand and nearly collapsed. Ranger barked, again and again, sharp, urgent. Lydia rushed in. "What is he doing now?" she snapped. Eleanor tried to speak, but her words tangled. I don't feel right." Lydia's eyes narrowed, not with concern but calculation. "She's having another episode," Lydia said loudly, to herself, to Mark, who wasn't even home. Ranger lunged forward and blocked Lydia from approaching Eleanor, fully. His hackles rose. His teeth showed. This wasn't a warning anymore. This was a line. Lydia screamed. "Mark, that dog is dangerous." Mark burst in moments later. Ranger stood firm. between Eleanor and Lydia, between truth and lies, between life and whatever Lydia was slowly doing. Mark looked from his wife to his mother, to the dog who had never once behaved this way, and suddenly a thought crossed his mind. What if Ranger wasn't the problem? What if Ranger was the answer? That night, Mark didn't sleep. He watched security footage, replayed audio, listened to tone, and for the first time he noticed what Ranger had seen all along: the pauses, the manipulation, the fear. And as the truth began to form, Ranger sat beside Eleanor's bed, unmoving, unwavering, waiting, because he knew something the humans were only beginning to understand. This wasn't confusion, this was abuse, and he would not leave her. Not now, not ever. Mark didn't confront Lydia that night, not yet. He lay awake beside her, staring at the ceiling, listening to her breathing slow into sleep. Her hand rested lightly on his chest, warm, familiar, and suddenly foreign. Every moment from the past weeks replayed in his mind: his mother's hesitation, her sudden silence, the way Ranger never left her side, and most of all, the medication. At 2:17 a.m., Mark quietly slipped out of bed. He moved slowly, barefoot, avoiding the creaking step near the hallway. Ranger lifted his head the moment Mark appeared, not alarmed, not aggressive, aware. "Easy, boy," Mark whispered. Ranger didn't move, but his eyes followed Mark with intent focus, as if he already knew what Mark was about to do. The kitchen light flicked on. Mark opened the cabinet where Lydia kept Eleanor's medications. There were 3 bottles. 2 were familiar. 1 wasn't. He picked it up. The label was printed. No pharmacy name, no prescribing doctor, just Eleanor's name. His pulse quickened. He checked the dosage, then checked the instructions, and his stomach dropped. The dosage had been doubled. And the medication itself wasn't prescribed for memory support. It was a sedative. Mark's hands trembled. Slowly, carefully, he pulled out his phone and searched the name. Side effects include dizziness, confusion, loss of coordination, slowed breathing. The words blurred. This wasn't help. This was control. Behind him, Ranger growled, low, controlled, as if confirming what Mark had just realized. Mark replaced the bottle exactly where it had been. He didn't wake Eleanor. He didn't confront Lydia. Not yet, because now he needed proof. And Ranger stayed close, step for step, as if he understood the gravity of what was unfolding. The next morning, Mark watched closely. Lydia poured Eleanor's tea, dropped the pill in, stirred, smiled. "There you go," she said sweetly. "Doctor knows best." Eleanor hesitated. Her hand hovered. Ranger barked. Once. Sharp. Eleanor froze. Lydia snapped, "For God's sake, Mark, do something about that dog." Mark spoke calmly. "Mom, don't take it yet." Lydia stiffened. What? I said, don't take it." Silence filled the kitchen. Eleanor slowly set the cup down. Lydia laughed nervously. "Mark, you're overreacting." "No," he said quietly. "I'm paying attention." Ranger sat directly beside Eleanor's chair, pressed close, his body firm, protective, unmoving. That afternoon, Mark installed additional cameras, not just for security, for clarity. He told Lydia it was for peace of mind. She agreed too quickly. That alone confirmed everything. Over the next 48 hours, the footage told a story no one could deny. Lydia removing Eleanor's phone from her room, adjusting medication amounts, locking doors, speaking softly, but with venom. And Ranger? Always there, blocking, guarding, interrupting, standing between Eleanor and danger long before anyone else saw it. The final straw came on the 3rd night. Eleanor tried to leave her room. The door wouldn't open. She knocked, softly. "Lydia?" No answer. Her breathing quickened. Ranger barked, fierce, relentless. Mark woke to the sound. He rushed down the hallway, and what he saw made his blood run cold. Lydia stood on the other side of Eleanor's door, holding the key. Her face wasn't angry. It was annoyed, like someone disturbed by a nuisance. "That's enough," Mark said sharply. Lydia turned. Her smile vanished. "She's not well," Lydia snapped. "You heard the doctor?" "No," Mark said. "I heard you." Ranger positioned himself fully in front of Eleanor's door, teeth bared, eyes locked. This wasn't instinct anymore. This was judgment. Mark took the key from Lydia's hand. "You're done," he said. Her voice rose, panicked now. "You're choosing a dog over your wife?" Mark didn't hesitate. "I'm choosing the truth." That night, Eleanor slept with her door open. Her phone returned, her medication corrected, and Ranger lay across the threshold like a living barrier. Mark sat in the hallway back against the wall, realizing something terrifying. If Ranger hadn't been there, if the dog hadn't refused to leave her, he might have lost his mother without ever knowing why. And that thought haunted him. Mark didn't sleep that night, neither did Ranger. The house felt different now, like a lie had been peeled back, exposing something rotten underneath. Eleanor lay awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling, every sound amplified. The hallway light remained on. Her door stayed open, and Ranger stayed exactly where he had planted himself, across the doorway, unmoving, a sentinel. At dawn, Mark made a decision he should have made weeks earlier. He called Adult Protective Services. His voice shook as he spoke. "I think my mother is being harmed," he said, "and I think the only reason she's still alive is our dog." There was silence on the line. Then, "We're sending someone today." Lydia sensed the shift immediately. She grew quiet, too quiet. She didn't yell, didn't argue. She watched, every movement, every word. Her eyes followed Eleanor with an intensity that made Mark's skin crawl. And Ranger? Ranger never broke eye contact with Lydia again. The social worker arrived just after noon. Her name was Karen Mills, mid-40s, sharp eyes, calm voice, the kind of woman who had learned how to hear pain between sentences. She sat with Eleanor first, alone. Mark waited outside, heart pounding. From the hallway he could hear Eleanor's voice, soft at first, hesitant, then stronger. Minutes passed, then nearly an hour. When Karen finally stepped out, her expression had changed. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't stress. This was abuse. "I need to speak with your wife," Karen said quietly. Lydia smiled when she entered the room. Too practiced, too composed. Karen asked simple questions. Lydia answered flawlessly, but Ranger didn't stop staring. And when Lydia shifted in her seat, crossing her legs, Ranger growled, low, controlled. Karen noticed. "Has he ever behaved like this before?" she asked. Mark swallowed. "Only when my mother was afraid." Karen nodded slowly. That was all she needed to hear. The investigation moved quickly after that. Doctors reviewed Eleanor's records. They confirmed it. The sedatives had no legitimate prescription. The dosage levels were dangerous, potentially fatal if continued. And the most chilling detail? The symptoms Lydia had been reporting, confusion, instability, memory loss, were side effects of the medication itself. She was creating the illness, gaslighting, isolating, controlling. That evening, as Karen prepared to leave, she pulled Mark aside. "If your dog hadn't interfered," she said quietly, "your mother could have declined rapidly, or worse." Mark's chest tightened. He looked down the hallway. Ranger lay beside Eleanor's bed, her frail hand resting on his back, still guarding, still watching, still refusing to leave. Lydia snapped that night. The mask finally broke. She confronted Mark in the kitchen, her voice shaking with rage. "You're humiliating me," she hissed. "She's ruining my life." Mark stared at her, cold. "She's my mother, and I'm your wife," Lydia screamed. "She's weak, confused. She doesn't even know what's happening half the time." Ranger barked. Sharp, explosive. Lydia turned on him. "Get that animal away from me." She raised her hand. Ranger didn't move, but Mark did. He stepped between them. "That's enough." Her eyes filled with something dangerous. Not fear, not regret, resentment. That night, Lydia packed a bag. She left without a word. The house fell silent. For the first time in weeks, Eleanor slept peacefully. No sedatives, no locked doors, no fear. Ranger curled up at the foot of her bed. And Mark sat in the chair beside them, staring at the sunrise through the window, thinking about one terrifying truth. If Ranger hadn't refused to leave her, no one would have known. 2 days later, Eleanor was moved temporarily to a care facility. Safe, monitored, protected. Karen assured Mark that legal proceedings would follow, but before Eleanor left the house, she did something that broke everyone's heart. She knelt slowly, painfully, and wrapped her arms around Ranger's neck. Her voice trembled. "You knew," she whispered. "You knew before I did." Ranger pressed his head into her chest, as if answering. As the car drove away, Mark stood alone in the driveway, the house behind him, the truth finally exposed. And beside him, Ranger, the dog who had seen the danger, the dog who had refused to leave, the dog who saved a life without ever speaking a word. The silence didn't last. It never does. 3 nights after Eleanor was moved to the care facility, Mark received the call. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. Mark. Lydia's voice came through, soft now, controlled, almost fragile. I just want to talk. Mark said nothing. Ranger, lying at his feet, lifted his head instantly, ears forward, alert. I know things got emotional, Lydia continued, but you're making a mistake. They're filling your head with nonsense. Mark closed his eyes. No, he said calmly. You filled this house with lies. There was a pause. Then Lydia laughed, short, cold. You really think your mother knows what's best for herself? She snapped. She doesn't even remember half of what happens to her. Mark's grip tightened on the phone. That's because you drugged her. Silence. Then quietly. You can't prove that. 2 hours later, Karen Mills called. She contacted us, Karen said. She wants access to Eleanor again. Mark's heart sank. No, she won't get it, Karen assured him. But you should be prepared. This isn't over. That same night, Ranger refused to sleep. He paced, checked the doors, growled at shadows. Mark trusted that instinct now more than his own thoughts, and he was right to. The next morning, Lydia showed up, unannounced, standing at the care facility entrance, crying, telling staff she was just worried. Eleanor saw her through the glass. Her hands began to shake. Her breathing changed. But before panic could take hold, Ranger stepped between them. The facility had allowed him to visit daily. The moment Lydia moved closer, Ranger blocked the path, still, silent, unyielding. He's dangerous, Lydia said sharply to the nurse. That dog shouldn't be here. The nurse looked at Eleanor, saw the fear, saw the relief, and shook her head. He's staying. Lydia's mask shattered. Her voice rose. Her words turned sharp. You're poisoning her against me. That was when Eleanor spoke. Her voice was weak, but clear. No, she said. You did that yourself. The room froze. Mark felt tears burn his eyes. Lydia stared, as if she were seeing a stranger. You don't know what you're saying, she hissed. Eleanor straightened, just a little. I know exactly what I'm saying, she replied, and for the first time, I'm not afraid. Ranger sat at her side, still guarding, still refusing to move. That was the last time Lydia ever came near Eleanor. The restraining order followed quickly. Then the formal charges, medical records, witness statements, expert testimony. The truth stacked higher than Lydia's lies ever could. Weeks passed. Eleanor improved. Without sedatives, her mind cleared. Her strength returned slowly. Every morning she waited for Ranger. Every evening she thanked him, not with words, but with her hand resting on his back, a silent understanding. One afternoon, Karen visited Mark. The case was nearly complete. There's something else, Karen said carefully. We discovered a pattern. Mark looked up. Lydia had a history, she continued. Previous partners, elderly relatives, similar control behaviors. Mark felt sick. She's done this before? Karen nodded. Your mother wasn't her first attempt. Mark closed his eyes and thought of what would have happened if Ranger hadn't noticed, if Ranger hadn't refused to leave. That night, Mark sat beside Eleanor's bed, the window open, the air calm, Ranger asleep between them. I should have seen it, Mark whispered. I should have protected you sooner. Eleanor smiled gently. You did, she said. You listened when he showed you how. She reached down, rested her hand on Ranger's head. He never doubted me. Ranger opened one eye and wagged his tail, just once. The courtroom was silent, not the ordinary kind of silence, but the heavy kind, the kind that presses against the chest. Eleanor sat in her wheelchair near the front, hands folded in her lap. Ranger lay beside her, still, alert, watching everything. Mark sat just behind them, his jaw tight, his hands shaking. He had waited years for this moment without knowing it. Lydia stood at the defense table, perfectly dressed, hair immaculate, expression calm. But something was different. Her eyes kept flicking toward the dog. The judge entered. Everyone rose, then sat, and the truth began to unfold. Medical records were presented first. Independent doctors testified. They spoke calmly, professionally, methodically, about inconsistent medication dosages, about sedatives prescribed without neurological justification, about cognitive decline that reversed once the drugs were stopped. Mrs. Hayes's confusion, the doctor said, was chemically induced. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Lydia stiffened. Then came the caregivers. 2 former aides. Both had quit suddenly months earlier. Both told the same story. How Lydia insisted Eleanor be isolated. How Ranger was often locked out of rooms. How Eleanor would become anxious whenever Lydia entered. How the dog would physically block access. One aide hesitated before speaking, then said softly, "That dog was the only one who reacted every time something was wrong." Lydia's attorney objected. The judge overruled. Then Karen Mills stood. She walked slowly to the stand, placed one hand on the railing, and looked directly at the jury. "This case," she said, "is not about a misunderstanding. It is about control." She paused. "About someone who believed an elderly woman had no voice, and about a dog who refused to believe that." Finally, Eleanor was called. Mark's breath caught. Her hands trembled as she was sworn in. The courtroom leaned forward. She spoke quietly but clearly. "I thought I was losing myself," Eleanor said. "I thought I was becoming nothing." Her fingers tightened in Ranger's fur. "But every time I felt afraid, he knew." She looked down at him. "He never left." She turned her gaze toward Lydia. "You told me I was weak. You told me I needed you." Her voice steadied. "But you were the one afraid." Lydia's composure cracked. "Just for a second." "Enough." The judge leaned forward. "Mrs. Hayes," she said gently, "are you afraid now?" Eleanor shook her head. "No," she replied, "because I'm not alone anymore." The verdict came swiftly. Unanimous. Guilty. Lydia was removed without a word. Her heels echoed sharply against the floor, then disappeared. Outside, sunlight poured across the courthouse steps. Eleanor closed her eyes, let it warm her face. Ranger sat tall beside her, proud, still vigilant. Reporters gathered, cameras flashed, but Eleanor waved them away. She didn't want headlines. She wanted peace. Weeks later, a letter arrived from the state, recognizing Ranger's actions, recommending his permanent placement with Eleanor as a registered support companion. Mark read it aloud. His voice broke. Eleanor smiled. "He chose me first," she said softly. That night, Eleanor sat on the porch of her new assisted living cottage, a place with open windows, kind staff, no locked doors. Ranger lay at her feet. Fireflies blinked in the dusk. "You saved me," Eleanor whispered. Ranger lifted his head, licked her hand, and rested his chin on her knee. But the story wasn't over yet, because the world was about to notice something else, something extraordinary. The story didn't end in the courtroom. That was only where the truth became loud enough for the world to hear. What followed was quieter and far more powerful. The assisted living cottage sat at the edge of a small lake, not fancy, not crowded, just calm, exactly what Eleanor needed. Every morning the sunlight slipped through the curtains, and Ranger was already awake, sitting beside her bed like he had done for months, watching, waiting, protecting. At first, Eleanor still hesitated. Years of control don't vanish overnight. She asked permission before standing, apologized for asking for water, lowered her voice even when no one had raised theirs. But Ranger noticed every tremor, every pause, every shadow of fear that passed across her face, and every time he responded the same way, by staying. If she hesitated, he pressed gently against her leg. If she startled, he stood between her and whatever frightened her. If she woke from a nightmare, he was already there, silent, solid, unmoving. The staff began to notice something remarkable. Eleanor was changing. She laughed again, not politely, but genuinely. She started gardening, started reading aloud, started choosing her own clothes. Her hands steadied, her voice grew stronger. Her eyes, once dimmed by fear, now carried light. One nurse whispered to Mark one afternoon, "It's like she came back." Mark swallowed hard. "She never left," he replied. "She was just waiting for someone to stay." Ranger became known around the facility. Residents greeted him by name. Children visiting grandparents knelt to pet him. Even the most anxious patients seemed calmer when he passed. But Ranger's world remained small, focused, centered on Eleanor. One afternoon, a reporter requested an interview. Mark declined. Eleanor shook her head. "I don't want to be famous," she said softly. "I just want to be free." The reporter left. The story spread anyway. Because some stories don't need permission, they find their way out. Weeks later, a letter arrived from the county, from the state, from the K9 unit Ranger once served with. They requested a visit. The ceremony was simple. No stage, no speeches, just a small gathering in the courtyard. An officer knelt, clipped a medal gently onto Ranger's collar. "For extraordinary service," the officer said. "Beyond duty." beyond command. Ranger didn't move, didn't bark, didn't react, because his duty had never been about recognition. Eleanor leaned down, pressed her forehead gently to his. "You never left," she whispered. Ranger closed his eyes. That night, Eleanor sat by the lake. The water reflected the stars. Crickets hummed. The world felt quiet, safe. Ranger lay beside her chair, his breathing slow, steady, certain. "You know," Eleanor said softly, "they thought I was confused." Ranger's ear twitched. "They thought I didn't know what was happening." She smiled. "But you did." She rested her hand on his head. "And you refused to let them silence me." Time passed. Seasons changed. But one thing never did. Ranger stayed. When Eleanor walked, he walked. When she rested, he rested. When her hands trembled, he pressed closer. Not because he was trained to, not because he was told to, but because love had chosen its place. And when people asked Eleanor how she survived, she didn't speak of pain, or courtrooms, or cruelty. She simply said, "I was believed." Some heroes wear uniforms, some wear badges, and some have 4 paws and a heart that refuses to leave. If this story moved you, let us know with a like or comment. And if you believe animals feel more than we ever imagine, subscribe for more stories like this, because sometimes the ones who save us never say a word.